He shoved me onto the roof while 8 armed men stormed our building. Dinner was perfect until an explosion rattled the walls. My billionaire landlord wasn't just rich. He was the head of a mafia family, and rival assassins had just breached the first floor. While he stayed behind to fight, his right-hand man forced me to jump across a 4-foot gap between rooftops in my bare feet and an emerald silk dress. The scariest part? I was more terrified of losing my monster than falling to my death.
Let us open on a haunting visual, Boston swallowed by 3 straight days of freezing, unrelenting rain. The city is a gray purgatory, and at the center stands Elena. Her cheap boots are soaked through as she stares up at an imposing Beacon Hill brownstone, a fortress of flawless red brick and white trim. She clutches a shattered phone, her final lifeline before a looming eviction turns her onto the streets. You and I have seen this narrative arc before. Exhaustion breaks the human spirit, making a 2 in the morning rental listing seem like a miracle rather than a mirage. When the owner replied instantly, she did not question the anomaly. We often forget that desperation acts as the ultimate blindfold, stripping away our caution when we are backed into the darkest corners of survival. The digital summons was explicit. Arrive tomorrow at 3 p.m. and come entirely alone. This isolation is a glaring, neon warning sign. Yet, when you are 26, grinding through endless double shifts in a diner, steeped in the scent of burnt coffee and shattered dreams, the primal instinct for survival simply overwrites logic. It is a quiet tragedy how the crushing fear of tomorrow forces us to ignore the flashing alarms right in front of our eyes. She drags her exhausted frame up those immaculate steps, unnerved by the sterile, unnatural perfection of the architecture. Her hand trembles over the buzzer. She anticipates a tired, greedy landlord looking for a quick payout. Instead, the heavy door sweeps open to reveal the true architect of her fate. The man standing in the doorway is no ordinary landlord, but a figure radiating the terrifying gravity of a syndicate boss. Barely into his 30s, he is cloaked in dark garments woven from wealth so immense it eclipses her yearly wage. His polished shoes mirror the weeping sky above, but it is his face that commands the frame, a sharp jawline and pitch-black eyes that dissect her worth in a single, calculating sweep. He possesses that effortless, lethal magnetism designed to lure intelligent minds into devastating traps. We must always remember that an attractive surface is often the most effective camouflage for the danger lurking beneath. He fixes his dark gaze upon her and simply states, "You are late." The voice is deep, laced with a heavy, unyielding accent. Elena scrambles to check her fractured screen, reading exactly 3:02 p.m. She stammers a frantic defense, arguing that a mere 2 minutes means absolutely nothing. His response is swift and glacial, informing her that in his brutal world, a 2-minute delay equates to a death sentence. This is the ultimate collision of her ordinary struggle and his lethal reality. Every biological imperative screams at her to flee, to run back into the bitter rain. Yet, the foyer radiates a seductive, artificial warmth. It is a profound human flaw that our immediate craving for physical comfort can so easily silence the desperate warnings of our intuition. She crosses the threshold, and the vault-like door seals her fate behind her, trapping the heavy scent of cedar and metallic danger. He commands her to the 3rd floor, sweeping past her toward a grand staircase, without a single backward glance. Men of his violent pedigree do not request compliance. They assume it, as naturally as one expects the turning of the tides. When poverty hollows you out, you surrender your autonomy without raising a fist. The contrast between them is stark. Her soaked boots slap clumsily against the marble, while his polished steps absorb into absolute silence. The architecture reveals its true paranoid nature. Hidden cameras observe from shadowed corners, and the walls are engineered to swallow sound entirely. Passing a heavily armed sentry on the second landing, the metaphor becomes literal. She is no longer just a struggling tenant, but a captive walking willingly into the lion's den. Every instinct firing within Elena warns that she is stepping into a meticulously laid trap. The boss easily reads the terror written across her posture. In a terrifyingly flat cadence, he reveals that the suite belonged to his recently deceased mother, and he merely requires a presence to occupy the space. There is no tremor of sorrow in his delivery. Yet, we must recognize that the most agonizing grief is often buried beneath the absolute coldest stoicism a person can project. Reaching the top landing, he turns a vintage brass key, opening a heavy wooden door with ghostly silence. He commands her to inspect the space. To enter, Elena must press close to his imposing frame. Suddenly paralyzed by the violent capability radiating from the terrifying lack of distance between their bodies. You and I must examine the brilliant framing of this moment. The stagnant air inside the suite is thick with the scent of winter frost and top-shelf whiskey. Elena stands paralyzed, overwhelmed by the crushing gravity of the owner. The space is a masterpiece of design. Gleaming hardwood floors, heavy blackout drapes, and shelves burdened with rare Italian literature. Her voice fractures as she questions the illusion. How could a luxury penthouse command a mere $800? Leaning casually against the frame, he coldly replies that he knows exactly what the property is worth. This is a timeless, brutal truth of the human experience. The most devastating traps in our lives never look like cages. They arrive perfectly disguised as a miraculous, impossible stroke of luck. His rumbling baritone shatters the quiet, demanding to know if the space meets her needs. Elena pivots, absorbing the crisp linens, the porcelain basin, and the thick glass, holding back the freezing storm. It is the absolute absence of decay. This is the holy sanctuary she desperately manifested during those draining shifts, pouring coffee for cruel strangers. Her defensive armor shatters, and she whispers her surrender, calling it perfect. He instantly claims the deal is sealed. When she nervously inquires about credit checks, he dismisses the civilian protocol. He dismisses the civilian protocol entirely. He operates on a vastly different moral axis. It is a haunting psychological reality that severe desperation will always blind a starving soul to the deadly, invisible strings attached to a sudden miracle. Pushing off the doorframe, he glides toward her with the silent grace of an apex predator. He dictates his twisted commandments: pay the toll, respect the sanctuary, and never probe into the shadows. He halts a mere 3 feet away, close enough for her to map the cruel golden flecks in his dark eyes and the violent scar dividing his brow. With chilling smoothness, he asks if she can manage that, addressing her directly as Elena. Ice floods her veins. She stammers that she never offered her name. He flashes a hollow smile, claiming she wrote it on the application. She knows she left it blank. We are forcefully reminded of a chilling truth. True terror is realizing the predator has already mapped your entire life long before you ever stepped into the clearing. Elena desperately demands to know his identity, attempting to claw back a fraction of control. His response is a masterclass in psychological dominance. He coldly labels himself a simple landlord who violently despises repeating his words. As his hand slips into his coat, Elena braces for the worst, her mind flashing to the countless missing women swallowed by the city. But the weapon he draws is made of paper, a folded, ironclad lease. He offers a brutal choice: sign the document or return to the frozen misery of her former life. The flat, emotionless tone of his voice is paralyzing. He starts a 30-second countdown. This scene is a profound test of the human condition. Her logic screams at her to run, but the intoxicating lure of financial salvation anchors her trembling feet to the floor. At a glance, the document masquerades as a standard agreement. Yet, buried in the print, lies a sinister clause demanding absolute silence regarding the owner and any suspicious activities. When she challenges the nature of these activities, he merely drops the countdown to 20 seconds. She protests, and he ruthlessly slices the timer to 15. 10, 9, 8, the pressure is suffocating. Let us pause and look at this deeply, because this is where the thematic core shines. Elena envisions the brutal eviction notice and the relentless hounds of medical debt waiting outside. It is a bitter truth we all must eventually face. The most defining choices in our lives are rarely a battle between good and evil. We are usually just forced to embrace the lesser of two absolute nightmares. The apartment wraps around her like an illusion of safety as the countdown bleeds away. 5, 4. Driven by pure survival, Elena snatches the pen, guards paper with a panic signature. The boss retrieves the contract, inspects the ink, and gives a chilling nod. Welcome home, Elena. He promises his men will move her belongings tonight. Turning toward the exit, he lets a heavy silence stretch across the room before delivering his absolute law. If you see something, it vanishes. If you hear something, it never existed. We must understand the tragedy woven into this climax. True sanctuary in a broken world always demands a massive toll. Her physical safety was finally secured, but only because she agreed to become completely blind to the terrifying monsters operating right next door. Elena stands paralyzed in that immaculate living room, realizing the trap is shut. Alessandro locks his dark eyes onto hers, pinning her like a fragile specimen. He doesn't yell. Instead, he whispers that breaking his rules voids the lease. She frantically nods, choking on her fear. When he gnaws her a good quiet is far more violence than a scream ever could. He promises the keys in an hour, orders her to wait, and vanishes. His heavy boots fade down the stairs, leaving her alone with a hammering heart and the freezing rain outside. It forces us to confront a hard truth about the compromises we make in our own lives. The most dangerous, inescapable prisons are rarely made of cold iron bars. They are almost always built with the softest, most luxurious walls. Consider Elena, framed by the window, watching the mundane rhythm of the street below. The people down there move through ordinary lives, unaware of the silent bargains made above them. They do not sign leases with unseen landlords who know their darkest secrets. Exhaustion overtakes her as she sinks into a mattress so plush it feels like an illusion, a sharp contrast to her old smoke-stained futon, but comfort often hides sorrow. She spots a faded photograph on the nightstand. A woman with soft eyes holds a 5-year-old boy, frozen in joy outside this exact building. It is a quiet reminder that pain rarely announces itself with broken locks. The heaviest ghosts are perfectly preserved within the polished rooms we mistake for sanctuary. When Elena grabs the picture frame, her fingers tremble because she is holding the anatomy of a predator. The little boy staring back has the exact piercing eyes of the syndicate boss who just claimed her life. But the real danger is hidden behind the photograph. She pulls out a thick, expensive card. Alessandro Vitale, Private Acquisitions. No address or phone number, just a terrifying blankness. Jagged black ink on the back spells out a lifelong curse. Always collect what is owed. She almost drops it before shoving the evidence back into the dark, her breath catching. Look at this moment and remember a harsh truth. Sometimes people bury their most brutal secrets not out of malice, but to build a shield. They hide the monster inside themselves simply to ensure our survival in a completely unforgiving world. Every instinct in her body is screaming to run, but the lease is signed. And the freezing streets offer no sanctuary. She has just hauled her fractured life into a gilded cage owned by a man whose aura radiates quiet violence. Barely an hour passes before an unmarked envelope slides beneath her door with 3 brass keys and 0 explanation. By midnight, she is unpacking her trauma. By 2 in the morning, she is scrubbing a kitchen that already gleams, and by 4, she is curled on the velvet sofa, her eyes anchored to the locked deadbolt. It is a harsh reality for anyone who has been backed into a corner. Desperation is a profound and silent undertow, and if we surrender to it, it will effortlessly drag us straight into the most treacherous waters imaginable. The pale sun creeps over Boston as Elena watches dawn bleed through velvet curtains that feel far too opulent for her reality. Running on 0 sleep, her veins buzz with frantic energy. With her diner shift starting at 7, she has to assemble a brave face. Stepping into an antique clawfoot tub, she lets the scalding water hit her, trying desperately to scrub away the lingering weight of Alessandro staring directly into her soul. His dark voice still echoes in her mind. Finally, she pulls on her faded work uniform and her squeaky sneakers. It is fascinating how we do this. We constantly wrap ourselves in the mundane armor of our everyday routines, relying on simple, repetitive habits to completely mask our deepest terrors from the rest of the outside world. Staring into the mirror, Elena feels like a trespasser. These polished floors were never meant for someone carrying her trauma. Her 20-minute walk to the diner becomes an exercise in survival. She spends the commute gaslighting herself, deciding that wealthy men just buy buildings and forget them. She uses the old photograph to explain the cheap rent, convincing herself he is simply a grieving man. Soon, she pushes through the diner doors, engulfed by the smell of greasy fries. This has been her refuge since dropping out to care for her sick mother. But let us be honest about human nature. It is genuinely terrifying to witness how far a desperate mind will stretch basic logic and ignore its own instincts just to rationalize a deeply dangerous situation. Let us step into Elena's world for a moment. You and I know how heavy grief can be, but add the crushing weight of medical debt, and it becomes completely suffocating. Her mother fought a 2-year illness, leaving behind a mountain of bills that debt collectors ruthlessly pursue, showing 0 respect for a fresh grave. Elena pushes through the diner doors and locks eyes with Rita, a veteran waitress with fading red hair, who bluntly points out Elena looks exhausted. Elena just nods, tying her apron in a total daze. Rita is the only soul who knows about the looming eviction, having found her sobbing in the cooler weeks ago. Hearing Elena finally secured a room, Rita offers a warm, tight squeeze on her shoulder. It is a quiet reminder for us all. Sometimes, the simplest touch of genuine human kindness is exactly what it takes to shatter a heavily guarded heart. Rita points a tired finger toward table 4, where a man has been waiting 20 minutes. Elena grabs the coffee pot, pasting on her practiced customer service smile. But the moment she approaches, that fragile mask completely shatters. Sitting there is a younger man radiating a terrifying, predatory energy. He wears a tailored suit that costs more than Elena makes in 6 grueling months. His cold eyes track her every move like a hawk. She tries to maintain composure, offering coffee, but the stranger simply leans back and smoothly drops her full name. He calmly recites her age, details her mother's passing, and checks off her deepest traumas like a mundane grocery list. It brings us to a harsh but necessary life lesson. The past has a cruel, relentless way of tracking us down and exposing our buried secrets, no matter how fast or how far we try to run. The stranger casually lists how completely isolated Elena is, noting her lack of family or romantic ties. Every calculated word feels like a knife twisting in her chest. When he drops her exact new home address, the coffee pot nearly slips from her shaking hands, slamming onto the table. Panic floods her system as she demands to know his identity. He softly replies his name is Luca, an enforcer working for Alessandro. He gestures for her to sit. When Elena uses her shift as a desperate excuse to escape, Luca flashes a chillingly hollow smile. Stick with me here, because the power dynamics are about to drastically shift. Luca bought the entire diner 30 minutes ago, and her greedy manager is in the back counting cash. It reveals a dark truth about the world we live in. True power never bothers to argue when it can simply pull out a checkbook and buy the entire room. Elena frantically scans the room, realizing the diner has become a complete ghost town. Even Rita has vanished into thin air. Through the office window, she spots her former boss clutching a massive envelope of cash, like he just won the underworld lottery. Her legs turn to absolute jelly, and she collapses into the vinyl booth across from Luca. The hitman purrs his quiet approval, praising her submission as if she just passed a twisted psychological test. He leans forward and explains that Alessandro wants to ensure she fully understands her new reality. Elena hides her shaking hands while Luca calmly reveals she is now under the syndicate's absolute protection. He slides a heavily encrypted cell phone across the table. It is a terrifying reality check for all of us. Sometimes the most inescapable cages in life do not look like scary iron prisons. They are simply locked with solid gold. Luca continues speaking in a smooth, chilling tone. He casually mentions that her old phone number has already been transferred to the new device. There is only one contact saved, and she must call it for absolutely anything. Elena stares at the device like a rattlesnake just uncoiled on the table. She tries to refuse, but Luca completely cuts her off. This was never a polite request. His conversational tone makes the underlying threat so much more paralyzing. When she weakly argues that she is simply paying rent, Luca leans in, deliberately exposing a dark shoulder holster under his jacket. He reveals she is living in the exact room where Alessandro's mother passed away. It is a massive psychological red flag and a powerful life lesson. Predators never believe in coincidences, and we must always question situations that seem a little too perfectly engineered. Luca tilts his head, asking if she truly grasps how incredibly rare this is, noting that many people would literally kill for that level of attention. The terrifying implication hangs heavily in the greasy diner air. Then he lays out the syndicate's absolute rules. There will be no unapproved visitors, no speaking about the apartment, and she must maintain her daily routine while remaining hypervigilant. Luca nudges the phone across the table, silently demanding she take it. Elena grabs the cold metal with totally numb fingers, watching as the screen lights up with two simple initials. A and V. Luca makes it crystal clear that Alessandro is constantly watching her every move, supposedly keeping her safe while enforcing her total isolation. Let us take this final thought with us. It is absolutely terrifying how quickly a fiercely protective guardian angel can morph into a suffocating warden. Let's look at how this scene is framed, shall we? Elena breathes out a realization that this so-called protection is a cage. Then a low, resonant voice from the shadows corrects her, calling it love. Alessandro materializes at the entrance, moving with the terrifying silence of a ghost. Dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, he embodies the classic cinematic trope of the beautiful monster. He dismisses his hitman, Luca, who immediately falls in line like a conditioned soldier. Luca's parting warning to Elena establishes the absolute hierarchy of their syndicate. She is now isolated with the architect of her entrapment. Look, we have to unpack this. Sometimes the behavior we rightly identify as terrifying control is just a fractured soul's twisted imitation of love. Notice the brilliant visual storytelling under these harsh, fluorescent diner lights. Alessandro slides into the booth, and the myth of the untouchable crime boss instantly shatters into harsh reality. Elena finally sees the physical toll of his lifestyle. The jagged scar, mapping his neck, os chronis carved under his eyes, but his hands hold the true narrative weight here. They are elegant, yet heavily textured with the silvery scars of repeatedly shattered knuckles. A subtle nod to the cycle of violence. He notes her paralyzing terror, or he pours his coffee with unnerving, practiced grace. He insists that fear breeds caution, and caution breeds survival. The haunting reality we must face is that sometimes the monsters we run from are the very ones who teach us how to endure. The contrast here is incredibly striking. Elena sits shivering in a sweltering diner, forcing her voice to stay steady as she asks what he really wants. Alessandro, studying her over the rim of his cup, admits he is still figuring out his own motives. But when she challenges him, he abruptly shifts the psychological power dynamic, interrogating her about her mother's death. The emotional whiplash is palpable. She confesses the grim reality of stage 4 cancer, detailing the 18 isolating months she spent as a teenage caretaker, stepping up because her father was a ghost. It is a brilliant character study of premature adulthood. The quiet truth about grief is that deep emotional trauma never actually disappears. We simply build stronger muscles to carry the unbearable heavy weight. Caught completely off guard, Elena demands to know why her past matters. Alessandro then delivers a masterstroke of psychological mirroring. He reveals that his own mother died in that very same apartment, breathing her last in the exact bed Elena now uses. When she argues he should have disclosed this morbid history, he sharply exposes the illusion of her free will. Would she have declined the roof over her head while holding an eviction notice? The poverty trap meant she had no real choice. He leaves a thick stack of cash on the table, issuing a cold directive to go home, even anticipating her empty refrigerator. We have to understand this terrifying dynamic. Our deepest, most desperate vulnerabilities are constantly exposed to those who possess the resources to exploit them. You and I need to break down the terrifying intimacy of his surveillance. This syndicate leader has mapped out her entire biological rhythm, tracking her meals and sleep cycles like an obsessive researcher. He speaks her name with a tone that bridges dark seduction and absolute command, explaining that her previous invisibility is gone. By residing in his domain and holding his private number, she is now a high-value target in a vicious underworld. He leans in, wrapping her in the heavy scent of cedar and smoke. Elena's internal horror stems not from the threat, but from her own magnetic attraction to it. It is a bitter pill to swallow. The toxic danger we are conditioned to flee is often the exact chaotic intensity a profoundly lonely heart secretly craves the most. Maintaining unrelenting eye contact, he issues a mandate that frames extreme possessiveness as a survival tactic. He demands to know if anyone even looks at her, justifying this toxic surveillance as the only way to keep her breathing. His smile is a weapon, sharp and devoid of warmth. Adjusting his tailored cuffs with the casual grace of an apex predator, he lays out his rigid protocols. She is to lock herself away, responding only to a courier named Marcus and a specific 3-knock code. When he turns to leave, Elena betrays her own conditioning, blurting out a desperate question of when he will return. Her immediate shame is palpable. This reveals a dark psychological truth. The human mind enters its most dangerous state the moment it begins seeking genuine comfort within the terrifying shadow of a predator. Elena frantically tries to re-establish boundaries, hiding behind the mundane logic of her rental agreement. Alessandro simply pulls on his leather gloves, dismantling her argument by stating the lease only exists on his terms. Then he delivers a psychological shot, casually instructing her to straighten the photograph on her private nightstand. The implication absolutely freezes the blood in her veins. He smoothly confesses that her entire sanctuary is rigged with hidden cameras. He frames this massive violation of privacy as an act of profound protection, daring her to learn the difference between guardianship and imprisonment. It perfectly illustrates a grim reality of human nature. We will eagerly surrender our fundamental freedom for a false sense of safety, convincing ourselves the golden bars of our cage are actually a shield. With that devastating exit, the crime boss vanishes, leaving Elena anchored to illicit cash and a burner phone that pulses with unseen danger. The next 3 weeks blur into a surreal psychological thriller. Her daily grind at the diner shifts strangely. Her manager abruptly stops assigning her the grueling closing shifts, a silent testament to Alessandro's invisible financial influence. When her perceptive coworker, Rita, starts probing, Elena builds a wall of total fabrication, painting her new landlord as a perfectly mundane figure. Alessandro has become a phantom, manipulating her reality from the shadows, while his silent courier, Marcus, drops provisions like clockwork. The hidden truth here is profoundly heavy. Carrying massive, dark secrets creates intense isolation, forging an iron chain that slowly drags you away from the normal world. Let's examine the brilliant tension of this burner phone. It remains mostly dormant, but occasionally illuminates the dark with cryptic, midnight directives, warning her of sudden storms or directing her away from specific headlines. The sheer horror sets in warnings manifest as violent news headlines days later. Elena is forced to realize that this man does not just anticipate the future, he actively orchestrates it. Her physical encounters with him are incredibly rare, reduced to fleeting glimpses of a blacked-out vehicle or his silent, brooding presence in the darkest corner of her diner. He watches her with the absolute, unblinking focus of an apex predator assessing its domain. The takeaway is chillingly simple. True, absolute power never needs to raise its voice to command the entire room into total submission. Their third encounter is a masterclass in silent intimidation. She drags herself into her building only to spot him exiting the heavily fortified second-floor apartment. A fleeting lock of eyes, a microscopic nod, and he vanishes into the stairwell shadows. But the narrative hinges entirely on their fourth meeting. It is a bitterly cold Tuesday night. Elena is operating on pure physical depletion after an agonizing double shift. Every muscle aches, and she grips her keys tightly between her knuckles, a pathetic but necessary shield against the city's underbelly. She is entirely hollowed out, wanting nothing more than the temporary death of sleep. It is a brutal but undeniable law of existence. The most life-altering chaos always chooses to ambush us in the exact moment. Our physical and psychological armor is completely stripped away. The moment her foot hits the upper landing, the quiet illusion of her building violently shatters. A sudden eruption of furious, rapid-fire Italian spills into the hallway. Elena knows she should look away, honoring the rules of survival, but the raw authority in Alessandro's voice paralyzes her. His tone is completely devoid of its usual dark charm, replaced by a lethal rage as he informs a man named Franco that betrayal carries an absolute price. The pathetic begging of the traitor is abruptly severed by a dense, sickening thud of dead weight hitting the floorboards. Then a suffocating silence swallows the corridor. Elena stands frozen in the shadows, her heartbeat deafening. It is a terrifying realization. When you navigate a world populated by literal wolves, a single moment of morbid curiosity can easily become your final mistake. Elena's physical terror betrays her. The microscopic metallic clink of her keys against the banister rings out through the heavy silence like a gunshot. The tonal shift in Alessandro's voice is brilliant here. He drops back to a terrifyingly calm register, casually announcing the presence of a witness. The thunderous approach of heavy boots breaks her paralysis, sending her sprinting upward. The corridor stretches out like a nightmare. Her sweat-slicked hands violently fumble with the lock, securing the deadbolt mere seconds before footsteps reach her floor. But she knows the terrifying truth. A cheap brass lock is absolutely meaningless against a syndicate enforcer. She retreats into her dark kitchen, gasping for oxygen. We have all experienced that visceral kind of fear. When pure, primal panic takes the wheel, it obliterates human logic entirely, leaving only the desperate urge to survive. Stick with me for this final psychological breakdown. Elena contemplates calling the Esprung. She is financially tied to a murderer. Suddenly, 3 deliberate knocks reverberate through the thin wood. The designated signal, Alessandro's voice, bleeds through the door, quiet and absolute, demanding entry. When she weakly refuses, he reminds her he is not making a request, offering a 3-second countdown before he shatters the frame, chillingly adding that it was his late mother's favorite door. Her logic fractures completely. Her trembling fingers slide the deadbolt open, choosing direct confrontation over a violent intrusion. He waits in the shadows, entirely unbothered. It is a devastating lesson in power dynamics. Sometimes we actively surrender to the inevitable, simply to trick our broken minds into believing we still have some tiny fraction of control. Let us examine this opening sequence together, you and I. The man steps into the frame wrapped in a tailored suit, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken violence. He looks like an untouchable don, but Elena catches the crack in his armor. His hands are wiped clean, yet crimson blood clings stubbornly to his cuticles. He orders her inside, the door shutting behind him with the finality of a bank vault. When the terror hits her, she collapses. Then comes the subversion of the monster. He presses a shockingly gentle, ice-cold hand to her trembling neck, coaching her breathing. The simple truth is that profound fear has a terrifying way of making us forget how to perform the most basic acts of survival. He stands above her, orchestrating her breath like a dark conductor. In through the nose, out through the mouth. When Elena finally gathers the courage to accuse him of the hit, his response shatters the typical cinematic denial. He simply says yes. No defense, no hesitation. He heaps his jacket, sitting down to unravel the syndicate lore. A man named Franco was skimming cash, and while Elena sees cold-blooded murder, Alessandro reframes it as duty. He executed a traitor who broke the sacred laws of their underworld. This is where we must be careful not to fall under the villain's spell. The quickest way to invite darkness into your own life is by finding rational excuses for the terrible actions of a monster. Picture the absolute paralysis of this moment. Elena stares at this hauntingly beautiful mobster, now desperately searching his eyes for even a fraction of human guilt. She finds only the cold, unyielding calculation of an apex predator. When she bravely assumes he will eliminate her next, Lucas simply leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and pins her with a chilling gaze. He commands her to completely erase the memory. In the brutal economy of the Mafia, ignorance is the only currency that actually buys survival. It is a harsh reality to swallow, but sometimes the truth does not set you free at all. It'll put the target on your back. If she refuses to forget, she loses his shield. In a forest full of wolves, she must cling to the very monster who frightens her. The cinematic tension here is thick enough to choke on. The silence in her apartment mimics the deafening ringing, right after a gunshot. While Elena trembles, Alessandro delivers a cold dose of reality. The syndicate cleaners hunting for witnesses are absolute savages, men who would make his own violence look like mercy. She only ever wanted a quiet, unremarkable existence. Yet life has a cruel way of extracting a heavy toll for the very peace we desire. Pacing to the window, he overlooks the glittering Boston skyline and declares that no one touches what belongs to the Don. When she fiercely whispers that she is not his property, he turns, his eyes burning with the toxic obsession of La Cosa Nostra. She survives because his dangerous name serves as her bulletproof vest. Elena bravely attempts to hold her ground, arguing that accepting his protection does not equate to giving up her soul. But the syndicate boss refuses the distinction. In 3 commanding strides, he towers over her, forcing her to tilt her head back just to meet his gaze. He calls her bluff, asking why such a clever girl has not simply packed her bags and vanished. When she claims she has nowhere else to go, he softly dismantles the lie. The profound lesson here is that human beings will often, willingly, choose the monster they can see over the terrifying shadows they cannot. Previous men treated her like a ghost, but this ruthless killer actually sees her. He raises his hand, letting his fingers hover just a breath away from her trembling jaw, weaponizing the unbroken silence. He coldly analyzes the undeniable electric pull between them, reminding her that this twisted, magnetic connection is the very thing keeping her breathing. Internally, Elena is trapped in a panic spiral. Rationality screams at her to call him a lunatic and bolt for the door. But human biology is a trickster. Often, our primal survival instincts disguise themselves as deep desire, dragging us directly toward the flame. She catches her own body, leaning into his dangerous warmth, craving the exact touch she should fear. When she finally asks what the boss demands in return, his answer is a masterful display of control. He orders her to forget the blood, sleep, and live a normal day. Brushing her lower lip, he promises that, whatever her ultimate fate, nobody else will ever harm her. Stick with me here, because this is where we see the breaking point of human endurance. When Elena demands to know how he can guarantee her safety, Alessandro answers without a flicker of hesitation. He promises that anyone who even attempts to harm her will die screaming. He fully embraces his identity as a cold-blooded monster, but a monster fiercely devoted to protecting his own territory. Before logic can intervene, he crashes his lips into hers, tangling his fingers deep into her hair. It is a sobering truth that our rigid moral compasses can instantly shatter the moment raw passion takes the wheel. She should have fought back. Instead, heaven help her, she kisses the architect of her nightmare, letting out a soft sigh caught between protest and absolute surrender. His free hand slides down her waist, pulling her flush against the rigid lines of his chest. To Elena, the man tastes like expensive whiskey and pure, intoxicating danger. Every nerve in her body ignites, and for one brief, reckless second, she completely forgets about the bloody executions and syndicate violence. We must remember that we are often at our most profoundly vulnerable exactly when we give ourselves permission to forget the things that terrify us. Her hands grip his tailored lapels, anchoring herself to the storm. Suddenly, Alessandro tears himself away. His chest heaves, his dark eyes warring between savage desire and disciplined control. His voice drops to a strained gravel as he orders her to go to sleep immediately, commanding her to lock the door behind him. He issues a sharp command to leave the door locked against the outside world. Stepping meticulously smooths his suit jacket, though a keen observer is the faint, betraying tremor in his lethal hands. He instructs her to keep her phone close and call at the slightest shift in the wind. When she gives a fragile nod, he calls her a good girl. It is a calculated phrase that makes her feel entirely owned, yet paradoxically dictates that they are dining together tomorrow at 7. When she protests about her work schedule, he calmly reveals he has already erased it. True power rarely bothers to ask for permission. It simply forces reality to bend to its will. His final instruction lingers in the air. Wear something beautiful. The heavy door finally clicks shut, leaving Elena entirely alone in the suffocating quiet of her apartment, the sharp taste of him still burning on her lips. She throws the deadbolt twice, her legs trembling as she navigates to the bathroom mirror. The reflection staring back is completely unrecognizable. Her lips are swollen, her skin flushed with a dangerous fever. It is fascinating how a single chaotic moment can entirely rewrite the architecture of who we believe we are. She looks exactly like a woman who has been deeply, permanently claimed by the darkness. Suddenly, her phone screen lights up the room. It is a message from Alessandro, keeping his silent vigil down on the cold street. He promises to stay right there until the sun rises, and she is undeniably safe. Logically, this is the part where the alarm bells should be deafening. Any rational person would feel completely suffocated by a violent crime boss watching their every move. But here is the twisted psychology at play. Control, when expertly disguised as genuine care, acts as a highly addictive narcotic. Instead of absolute terror, a dangerous warmth wraps around her heart like a chain forged from soft silk. Utterly exhausted, she collapses into bed without changing, gripping her phone like a lifeline in a storm. When she finally blinks awake, bright morning light is pouring across the room. For one fractured second, she hopes the violence was just a fever dream. But then the rich aroma of espresso hits the air, and she spots the steaming porcelain cup resting on her nightstand. The crushing weight of reality caves in instantly. He had bypassed her locks and stood inside her sanctuary while she was completely unconscious. You and I are going to look at this and recognize just how terrifying that level of absolute vulnerability truly is. He was close enough to listen to the rhythm of her breathing, placing the cup down without making a single sound. Her hands shake violently as she lifts the expensive china. The coffee is perfect, exactly the way she takes it, because men like him make it their literal business to know everything. Beside the saucer rests a thick card, his bold handwriting demanding she not be late for dinner. A wise woman would have fled down the fire escape. But human nature is profoundly dark. She simply sits in bed and drinks his coffee. Today, you and I are going to unpack a narrative that perfectly illustrates the sheer gravity of desperation. We begin with Elena, standing before a closet filled with nothing but thrifted fabric, and the melancholic black dress she wore to her mother's funeral. She is standing at the absolute precipice of ruin. But then, the silence breaks. Her phone lights up with a message from the syndicate boss himself, instructing her to look outside and forbidding any argument. She moves toward that door like a character stepping into a gothic horror, only to find a pristine white box bound in dark ribbon. Her pulse is deafening in the quiet room. Here is a truth we all eventually learn. Pride is a remarkably heavy burden to carry when your hands are empty. Sometimes, survival demands that you open the door. Every rational instinct Elena possesses is screaming at her to leave that pristine package alone. Accepting a gift of this magnitude from a man forged in violence crosses an invisible, terrifying boundary. We constantly lie to ourselves about where the actual point of no return is, do we not? Yet, her trembling hands pull the ribbon anyway. Beneath the delicate tissue lies a staggeringly heavy, flawless emerald silk dress, custom-tailored to her exact measurements. Hidden beneath its folds are sharp black heels and a heavy velvet box holding pure gold and emerald earrings. It is a devastating display of calculated power. The lesson here is timeless. Temptation rarely approaches looking grotesque. It prefers to wear a beautifully tailored suit to quietly slip past our defenses. Those jewels are breathtaking, but they are also terrifying. A gesture this extravagant is never just a gift. It is a loaded psychological question waiting for a surrender. Her screen illuminates again. Alessandro notes the green perfectly mirrors her eyes, a detail he memorized during their very first encounter. She frantically types that it is entirely too much, but his response is a masterclass in manipulation. He reminds her it is merely silk, not a wedding band, daring her to wear it while subtly warning her not to make him come upstairs. She spends the day trapped in a mental fog, haunted by the memory of him kissing her like she was his only oxygen. The harsh life lesson is this: the most dangerous traps we ever face are the ones we actively want to step into. As 6 o'clock strikes, the metamorphosis begins. Let's look at this piece by piece, shall we? She stands under a scalding shower, symbolically washing away the grit of her desperate past. She keeps her makeup minimal before slipping into the emerald dress. The silk cascades over her shoulders like liquid glass, perfectly accentuating the shape she has spent months hiding beneath oversized coats. Stepping into the sharp black heels, she radiates an entirely new, commanding energy. The emerald studs catch the dim light, illuminating a stranger in the mirror. It is a stunning visual shift, and it teaches us something profound. Sometimes we have to put on a beautifully crafted disguise just to finally introduce ourselves to who we really are. The woman in the glass is formidable, a version of herself the brutal streets never allowed her to become. True beauty is often just the physical surf at the soul, catching up to the resilience of the soul. At 2 minutes to 7, 3 heavy knocks echo through the room. Pulling the door open, she finds Alessandro looking like a beautifully tailored menace, holding a single red rose. For a fraction of a second, his dark eyes widen, a rare crack in his carefully constructed armor. He curses under his breath, genuinely stunned. When she nervously blames the dress, he leans in, smelling of rich cedar, and whispers that the silk only reveals what he already knew. The lesson here: the right people will always see your true worth long before you ever dress up for them. The tension in that claustrophobic hallway is thick enough to cut. He offers the rose, and Elena accepts it, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her panic. As their skin brushes, an undeniable current passes between them. You can actually see the sharp tick of his jaw. He gestures toward apartment 2B, where warm light spills into the corridor. This is the exact room where a horrific mafia execution took place weeks ago. He has completely gutted and transformed it, stating with cold detachment that she will never know what happened there. But she already knows. Yet she still takes his arm and crosses the threshold. Because here is a hard truth of human nature. Sometimes saying no to a highly dangerous person feels far more fatal than closing your eyes and stepping directly into the fire. The space is completely unrecognizable. The lingering ghost of syndicate violence has been erased, replaced by soft ambient lamps and a dining table set with fine crystal. This is where the power dynamic takes a fascinating turn. Elena stands paralyzed, asking if he accomplished all this in a single day. He smoothly deflects, noting that he has people for that, a classic display of mob infrastructure. He pulls out her chair with old-world manners, claiming he wanted her to be comfortable. When she quietly asks why, the question genuinely catches him off guard. Pouring an impossibly expensive French vintage, he simply states that she deserves nice things. The underlying lesson is incredibly real. We are always the most vulnerable to kindness when we have completely forgotten what it actually looks like. His voice drops into a low register, observing that every man in her past has only ever drained her, extracting her energy and hope. He wants to be the one who finally gives. Elena fires back that he does not even know her. He counters with a razor-sharp smirk, assuring her he knows enough, before toasting to forgotten endings. The atmosphere is suffocatingly dense. She sips the rare wine, acutely aware his calculating eyes are tracking her every breath. Then he shatters the mood. She shatters mother, demand violent world as mother, dragging his violent world onto the table. He stiffens, warning her that murder is not dinner conversation. She snaps back that neither is kissing a tenant after a hit. The lesson? The bitter truth always demands to be heard, no matter how elegant the setting. That accusation hangs suspended in the air, as lethal as a drawn blade. Elena immediately realizes she has pushed a mafia boss too far. His knuckles turn stark white against the glass, a muscle ticking violently in his jaw. But instead of an explosion, the tension suddenly fractures, and he lets out a warm, genuine laugh that feels entirely out of place. Leaning back, he concedes the point and asks what she wants to know. She asks if his mother was a criminal. His smile vanishes instantly. He reveals she was a saint who married his father, totally blind to the syndicate's reality. By the time she understood the monster she married, she was caged. She tried to flee once and never tried again. Here is your lesson. Love and fear are very often built using the exact same bricks. He looks profoundly haunted, anchored by the weight of generational trauma. He explains his mother endured that nightmare solely to protect him. When Elena whispers a soft apology, he immediately shuts it down. He insists his mother gave him the ultimate tools for survival, how to read a room's power, and how to ruthlessly protect what is his. Locking his intense gaze on her, he declares his mother would have respected Elena, recognizing a shared, quiet strength the world ignores. Before she can process this, his enforcer, Luca, barges in with the food. Luca refuses to make eye contact, radiating pure hostility. Alessandro smoothly serves the meal. Lesson time. The absolute scariest thing about total control is how flawlessly it disguises itself as genuine care. This is where the psychological thriller element kicks in. He observes she is too thin, casually dropping that his guard, Marcus, reports she barely touches her groceries. Elena freezes with cold dread. She demands to know how a guard knows her eating habits. Alessandro merely smirks, taking pride in his terrifying oversight. We are about to uncover the truth. He openly admits to installing hidden cameras in her hallway. He promises her apartment is private, but he monitors her exits. When she rightfully panics, he frames this massive invasion of privacy as protection, instructing her to learn the difference. They finish the meal in deafening silence. The lesson here is brutally obvious. A golden cage is still a cage, no matter how delicious the food is. Elena cannot hold back her confusion anymore. She asks the ultimate question. He could have any woman conditioned to the toxic reality life, so why drag in an outsider? Alessandro places his fork down and studies her face. He asks if she genuinely does not understand. He explains that when she first stepped into that blood-stained room, she looked at it like it was a palace, a desperate answer to her prayers. He reaches across the table, his heavy hands wrapping around hers. He notes that when he asked her name, she flinched as if expecting the world to strike her. He wants to be the one man who does not break her. The life lesson is profound. The deepest, most painful human scars always manage to recognize each other from all the way across the room. We open on a moment of profound psychological tension. Alessandro leans close, his voice a murmur as he offers Elena a kingdom instead of ruin. He insists he wants to build her a palace rather than tear down her fragile life. Elena feels a cold dread, countering that his obsession is not love, but a suffocating need for possession. Yet, in the shadowed corridors of the Mafia, love and ownership are indistinguishable. He promises to show her the difference, forcing his protection upon her, regardless of her consent, driven by a twisted sense of honor. It brings us to a quiet, unsettling truth. When a dangerous amber builds you a golden cage, the true trap is never the heavy iron lock on the door. The real trap is the undeniable comfort you eventually find inside. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Their dinner plays out like a slow waltz. They trade stories of isolated childhoods, deliberately ignoring the blood on his hands. In a strange twist, they are bound by a shared love for the exact same tragic literature. He wields his charm perfectly, offering dark humor that reads her very soul. Elena sits in terrified awe, realizing how effortlessly she could surrender to this crime boss. By 9 o'clock, his massive silhouette absorbs the hallway light outside her door. Instead of claiming her lips, he presses a soft kiss to her forehead, sealing a silent, unbreakable contract. It leaves a haunting lesson for us all. We rarely run from the devil when he introduces himself with the flawless manners of a perfect gentleman. The illusion of their evening shatters instantly. A massive explosion detonates below, rattling the glass in its frames. Before Elena can draw breath, the romantic lead vanishes, replaced by a hardened predator. Alessandro slams her against the plaster, shielding her with his body, a heavy pistol suddenly gleaming in his grip. The silence breaks as Luca crashes through the door, his tailored shirt painted with fresh blood, gasping that the rival Antonelli family has breached the perimeter. Alessandro does not panic. His expression hardens into a terrifying calm as he calculates the slaughter. It proves a visceral truth. When the fires of chaos ignite, polite masks burn away entirely, leaving only the raw, undeniable core of exactly who a person is meant to be. Luca gasps that 8 armed assassins are sweeping the floors. Alessandro absorbs the grim mathematics without a flinch. A second blast ruptures the corridor, plunging the world into darkness. In the pitch black, Alessandro crushes Elena against his chest, and she feels the frantic rhythm of his heart. This ruthless syndicate leader is entirely paralyzed by the sudden terror of losing her. He issues harsh commands, demanding total obedience, because her survival depends on it. Numb with shock, she simply nods. He seizes her hand, declaring they must reach the roof so Luca can smuggle her to safety. It unearths a crucial realization. True survival is never about foolishly fighting every single war that finds you. Real strength is possessing the quiet wisdom to know exactly when to run. Panic consumes Elena as she asks his plan. Alessandro turns to ice, declaring he is staying behind. He shoves her toward Luca, but in a sudden fracture of restraint, pulls her back. He claims her lips in an agonizing kiss, heavy with unspoken grief. Staring into her eyes with raw torment, he delivers a staggering decree. If the shadows claim him tonight, his entire criminal empire and wealth become hers. She shatters, pleading with him to reconsider, but he dissolves into the smoke, commanding her to never look back. Luca pulls her away into the dark stairwell. It paints a devastating portrait of devotion. Sometimes, the most tragic manifestation of love a broken soul can ever offer is the absolute destruction of themselves for your safekeeping. The stairwell echoes with deafening gunfire. Luca hisses at Elena to abandon her heels. She kicks them aside, her bare feet striking the freezing concrete. From below, the symphony of violence crescendos. Alessandro barks commands in Italian, followed by an agonizing scream that is cut off. Elena sobs that he is walking into his grave. Luca strikes her with the harsh truth, insisting the boss will slaughter every man down there, provided he is not distracted by her presence. They burst through the roof door into the biting chill, the Boston skyline sprawling before them. Stick with me, because this reveals a haunting reality. It shows how the massive world around us remains entirely blind to the bloody private tragedies unfolding quietly in the shadows. Luca drags her across the sharp roof gravel toward the precipice. A terrifying 4-foot chasm of darkness separates them from the next building. Elena recoils in horror, digging her feet into the stones. But Luca is unrelenting. He seizes her shoulders, forcing a desperate gaze to lay out the cold reality. Alessandro is not a victim. He is the apex predator of the syndicate, a man forged in decades of blood. Luca insists the assassins below are dead men walking. Yet, if Elena is caught, her capture will shatter the kingpin's lethal focus and seal his fate. It illuminates a deeply uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, our frantic desire to stay and save the people we love becomes the exact distraction that ultimately guarantees their complete destruction. The icy wind rips tears from her cheeks as she refuses to abandon the man bleeding for her. Luca ignores her bargaining, pacing the ledge to measure the abyss. He commands her to leap, forbidding her from looking down. Gathering momentum, Luca sprints and launches across the divide, landing gracefully on the concrete. He pivots, screaming for her to follow, but Elena remains rooted, considering a suicidal return just to perish beside the boss. Luca spots the hesitation and weaponizes her for love, bellowing that staying is an absolute death sentence for Alessandro. It leaves us to ponder a profound reality. Often, the truest form of courage we can display is simply closing our eyes and blindly hurling ourselves into the unknown. Luca's voice slices through the gale, stripping away her illusions. He demands to know if she is prepared to be the weapon that ends Alessandro's life. The harsh words strike her like a physical blow. It is a moment that demands we pause and reflect. A suffocating blanket of guilt will always bind us far tighter than the sharpest sting of physical terror. That crushing guilt finally shatters her paralysis. She backs up, breathless, forcing her battered legs into a sprint. For one agonizing heartbeat, she is suspended over the fatal drop. She crashes into the gravel, and Luca hauls her up with a murmur of respect. They scramble down the fire escape, her torn feet leaving smears of red. Just as they reach the alley, the building above is consumed in a catastrophic eruption. The night air is shredded by the rhythm of weapons and shattering glass. Elena refuses to picture the grisly fate befalling her protector. They hit the slick alleyway, choking on the scent of ozone and cold rain. Luca works his phone, and an unmarked sedan slides from the shadows. He issues directives to the driver to bury her in a secure location. It brings a profound tension to the surface. While blind passion inspires reckless sacrifices, true loyalty requires the agonizing discipline of stepping away. The enforcer pauses, his jagged edges softening for a second. He swears upon his soul that Alessandro will find her when the ash settles. But Elena collapses into the leather seat, asking the one question that haunts her. What happens if he never makes it out alive? Luca's expression remains carved from stone. He promises with absolute certainty that Alessandro will survive. He confesses he has fought beside the man since they were boys and has never seen his boss look at a soul the way he looks at her. He vows that Alessandro would gladly reduce heaven and hell to ash just to find his way back. You and I must look at this together and realize a vital truth. Genuine devotion is never whispered in the safety of a room. It is forged when you are actively marching into the inferno. Delivering his promise, Luca charges straight back into the screaming maw of the gunfight. As the heavy car accelerates, Elena presses her hands to the glass, watching the building recede, lit only by the terrifying flashes of muzzle fire consuming the upper floors. Let us examine this opening scene together as it perfectly sets our emotional stage. Alessandro is fighting a brutal war to protect his syndicate, while Elena is trapped in the sterile isolation of a Cambridge safe house. The armed driver sweeps the perimeter and guards the door. Elena paces the freezing floorboards, her emerald gown looking like a tragic costume in this bleak room. She grips the telephone, praying for a sign that the dangerous man she loves is still breathing. 1 hour bleeds painfully into 3, and the quiet of this mafia world becomes absolutely agonizing. Finally, at 1:47 in the morning, the dead air fractures. It reminds us of a universal truth. In moments of profound crisis, the helpless's waiting is always heavier than the war itself. The telephone suddenly shatters the quiet. Elena answers before the first ring even finishes, her hands shaking violently. Hearing the exhausted voice of Alessandro makes her emotional walls collapse entirely. She frantically asks if he took a hit. He brushes the question aside, claiming minor injuries, then states with chilling calm that the entire threat is neutralized. There is a profound tragedy in hearing the person you love discuss a slaughtered hit squad like a casual business transaction. He orders her to stay hidden until dawn, but she weeps into the receiver, begging to see his face. She needs physical proof that he survived the violent night. We often forget a very basic human reality. True relief only comes when we can physically touch the people we love. Alessandro drops his voice into a dangerously low whisper, asking what she truly wants. She begs him to be safe by her side. A heavy silence follows, filled entirely by his ragged breathing. He swears he will arrive by dawn and tells her to sleep, but sleep is a luxury only the peaceful get to enjoy. Her mind remains an absolute war zone. The line goes dead, leaving Elena frozen. She ignores the water and food offered by her guard, curling up under a forgotten blanket. She watches the windows shift from pitch black to a bruised gray and finally to a pale morning blue. At 6:23, a sudden noise shatters the stillness. This quiet scene reveals a harsh lesson. When you are completely powerless to help the person you love, time becomes your absolute cruelest enemy. A sharp knock echoes through the room. The guard checks the peephole and steps aside as Alessandro walks in. Pay close attention to this visual contrast with me, because it is deeply striking. He looks like he crawled out of a nightmare. His expensive suit is shredded and soaked in blood. A nasty gash rests over his eye, and dark bruises paint his jaw. He favors his left side with every painful step, but he is breathing. Elena stands in a daze, letting her blanket drop as she stares at the Grim Reaper himself. Recognizing the heavy weight of this reunion, the driver quietly slips out the door. It teaches us a profound truth about true vulnerability. When the heavy armor of our defenses finally falls away, only the absolute barest honesty remains. 8 men, Alessandro whispers into the quiet room. A rival family sent an elite death squad to steal his empire. He asks if she knows their fatal mistake, and Elena simply shakes her head. They assumed having something to lose made him weak. Dragging his battered body across the floor, he explains they completely misunderstood the mind of a desperate man. Finding someone to love does not make a dangerous man softer. It gives him a reason to bare his teeth. When those assassins breached his walls and he realized they might touch her, his violent purpose became terrifyingly clear. We can learn something powerful from this psychological shift. Love does not always calm the storm inside of us. Sometimes, it becomes the very lightning that strikes our enemies down. Alessandro lifts his bloodied hand, cupping her cheek with bruised knuckles. He tells her straight up that he wants absolutely everything. Her mornings, her nights, her fears, and her trust. He freely admits he is not a good man and promises to commit far worse sins just to keep her breathing. We naturally look for knights in shining armor, but sometimes the only one who can save you from the wolves is a darker wolf. He offers absolute protection, a world where she will never be invisible again. As tears wash down her face, Elena chokes out that his promise sounds like a beautiful gilded cage. The lesson buried in her fear is profound. Total security always demands a heavy price, and absolute safety can very easily feel exactly like captivity. He presses his forehead against hers, his rag breath ghosting over her lips. No, it is a fortress, and she would be its queen, not its captive. He lays out his terms with complete vulnerability. If she wants to work, she can. The only absolute rule is her unconditional safety. If she walked away, it would entirely destroy him. But she would still keep her freedom and his protection. He pulls back just an inch, his dark eyes searching her soul. With a rough catch in his throat, he admits his final truth. He was hoping she would choose to love the monster anyway. This reveals a fragile reality about human connection. A true partner never attempts to clip your wings. Instead, they build a massive sky where nothing can ever shoot you down. Elena stares into the tired eyes of this beautifully dangerous man. He just slaughtered a hit squad to protect her, or offered her a kingdom, and kept his promises. Every logical nerve in her body screams to run from the bloodshed trailing him. Stick with me here, because you and I both know the brain and the heart rarely agree on survival. Her treacherous heart begs to stay. When she asks about the rival families plotting to strike again, Alessandro refuses to soften the blow. He can minimize the daily chaos, but he can never erase the heavy crosshairs painted on his back. The lesson in this moment is absolutely unavoidable. When you choose to deeply love a complicated person, you must also willingly accept the brutal shadows that constantly follow them. She asks the final, heaviest question of the night. If she chooses him, what happens next? His hand tightens against her skin, vowing she will become completely untouchable. Anyone who dares cross her path will face a terrible fate. She would wear his ring, carry his dangerous name, and be woven into his dark syndicate. Elena's breath hitches at the mention of a ring, and Alessandro instantly softens. He promises it will only happen when she realizes this is not a toxic obsession. He struggles to find the right words. Admitting his violent devotion is the closest thing to love a shattered man can offer. We must remember a difficult truth about affection. Broken people rarely speak the traditional language of romance, but their fierce loyalty is entirely unbreakable. The heavy tension breaks as Kara does the absolute unthinkable. She reaches up, her small hand covering Alessandro's ruined knuckles, which were torn from the brutal violence he committed in her name. Anyone else would have run from the blood. Instead, she turns her head and kisses his battered palm. Suddenly, his mouth is on hers, desperate and tasting of iron. She pulls him closer by his torn shirt, completely ignoring his sharp wince of pain. When he asks if this is a yes, she whispers that she will try to build something real right in the center of his hell. This cinematic moment teaches us a remarkable lesson about resilience. Sometimes the most authentic love is never found in the easy light, but is fiercely forged in the absolute darkest of places. He kisses her again, the wild desperation finally fading into something incredibly soft. He promises they will figure out the rest of the syndicate together. When he pulls back, Kara notices the fresh blood weeping through his shirt. She insists he needs a doctor, but just needs sleep, and he needs in that exact order. Careful of his split skin, she gently guides him into the bedroom. Watching him strip off that ruined suit is a quiet lesson in heartbreak, as every dark bruise tells a violent story across his skin. It serves as a beautiful reminder of our shared condition. We easily forget how truly vulnerable the most people are until they willingly take off their heavy armor for the sake of love. Let us stay right here for a second, because we are unpacking the emotional core of this entire story together. They lay on top of the covers. He is stripped down while Kara remains in that emerald dress, too exhausted by the chaos to change. Alessandro pulls her flush against his chest, burying his weary face in her hair. Half asleep, he murmurs his deep gratitude, thanking her for choosing to try. She laces her delicate fingers through his damaged hands. His rough voice fades as sleep takes him, but his protective grip never lets go. Kara watching the dawn paint the ceiling gold, simply listening to his heartbeat. It brings us to a quiet truth we must all learn. In life, the most profound and lasting peace usually arrives directly after we survive the absolute worst storms. The morning light creeps across the room, illuminating a reality that feels entirely fractured. Today, you and I are going to look at a story that breaks every rule of romance. Kara opens her eyes to a life built on a razor wire of danger, bracing for days shadowed by constant threats. Yet within this chaos, she holds a terrifyingly pure devotion. Alessandro is, by all common measures, a monster. But the great irony here is that he has become her shield against the dark. She came looking for a cheap apartment and stumbled into the lair of a crime lord. 3 months later, she wakes in his Beacon Hill penthouse under a gaze of absolute reverence. The lesson is striking. Sometimes, the very places that should terrify us become the only true sanctuary we will ever know. She stretches out with casual grace, murmuring a soft greeting as the sun catches the heavy emerald on her left hand. It is not onto her finger 2 weeks ago. It is not an official proposal, but a quiet, heavy promise waiting for her to understand she is no captive. With an eagerness that feels almost childish, Alessandro pulls her from the bed and leads her to his office. Usually, this room breathes the cold air of his criminal syndicate. Today, the massive oak desk is shoved aside to make room for an easel. Resting on it is a framed piece of paper, the deed to the entire building at 247 Beacon Hill, signed strictly in her name. Real love does not hide behind empty promises. When you truly care for someone, you secure the very ground beneath their feet. Kara instantly steps back, insisting she cannot possibly accept an entire building. Alessandro stops her protests right there. He steps close, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. His voice is low, explaining that this ultimates if his enemies ever tear down his empire. This is her guaranteed escape route. She spins in his hold, fiercely promising she is not going anywhere. The terrifying mob boss offers a surprisingly soft smile. He needs her to hold the absolute power to leave, just to know she stays by choice, not by force. She jokes that it is just a beautifully decorated cage. But let us look at this closely, shall we? Love cannot survive without a choice. It only carries real weight when it is offered with entirely open hands. He kisses her face gently, swearing this is no cage. He is handing her wings, and whether she flies away or stays is entirely up to her. Kara stares down at the deed, seeing her independence in permanent black ink. She lifts her gaze to this heavily scarred man, someone who has taken lives simply to keep her breathing. He showed her the huge difference between owning a person and fiercely protecting them. Right there in the quiet office, she drops the match. She tells him she is staying because she is wildly in love with him. Alessandro freezes, completely stunned. She has never spoken those words out loud before. His version of romance is a dark, twisted shadow, but she does not care. Loving someone means holding their absolute ugliest flaws up to the light and choosing them anyway. She looks this ruthless boss in the eye and tells him he is enough, exactly as he is. Alessandro pulls her against his chest in a fierce embrace, heavy with raw emotion. Resting his forehead against hers, he admits he lacks soft words. Instead, he makes a dark, unbreakable vow. There is no moral line he will not cross, no brutal price he will not happily pay to ensure her safety. Kara smiles softly, calling it a terrifying, dangerous kind of love, but love all the same. Alessandro lets out a rare, broken laugh that echoes in the room. Only this woman could make captivity feel like total freedom. Stick with me, because this is the core truth of it all. The things the outside world labels as hopelessly broken are sometimes exactly what makes our souls perfectly whole. Looking back, Kara measures the distance between her current self and the invisible girl from 3 months ago. That terrified, the confident, of her would never recognize the confident woman standing here today. But that old ghost had never been truly seen, let alone guarded with such intense, all-consuming devotion. She went searching for a simple apartment and somehow found a real home in the darkest shadows of the underworld. She found an impossible freedom with a man who held the power to lock her away, but handed her the keys instead. Sure, this freedom comes armored with security cameras and guards, but it is a choice she is happily making. Think about the cold truth of survival. Sometimes the absolute safest place to stand is right in the dead center of a raging hurricane. Alessandro buries his face in her neck, a rough whisper begging her to come back to bed. He murmurs that the outside world can wait. But Kara catches his heavily scarred hand, telling him the world could disappear forever as long as she has him. He pulls her close, swearing she will have him for as long as she wants him. Completely, eternally. Standing there, wrapped in the fierce embrace of her beautiful monster, the pieces of her life finally align. She is perfectly safe despite the massive target on his back, and totally free despite the guards outside the door. It is a profound realization. You can belong completely to someone else, yet remain entirely yourself. We chase independence, but the truest freedom is finding the person who finally anchors your soul. That apartment was just the opening scene. Kara knows now that her true home was never meant to be built and Ba sanctuary rest. Her real sanctuary rests in the absolute security of his arms. It is the heavy, shielding weight of his incredibly dark brand of love. She sees the reality clearly. She knows the brutal violence that shadows his every move. Yet she is ready to choose this chaotic existence and this terrifying man every single day. As you and I wrap up this story, take this simple truth with you. Real love does not always show up wrapped in a clean, perfect bow. Sometimes it arrives bruised, bleeding, and covered in heavy scars. But when it stands as an iron shield between you and a freezing, bitter world, you grab onto it with both hands and you never let go.